Greetings everybody around the world. It's time once again for Ancient Aliens Radio. This is the dedicated radio show for the cast of Ancient Aliens. Here we interview authors and researchers as an ongoing investigation into the ancient alien theory. Don't forget to like us on Facebook or subscribe to the YouTube channel Ancient Aliens Radio. And in just a moment I'm going to be talking to Scott Alan Roberts, aka Scotty Roberts. Scott's no stranger to Capricorn Radio. This is his third time on the show. He's becoming a veteran as we speak. And let me just tell you about Scott before I bring him on. His background is laced with varied and diverse skills and experience. After 2 years in a Christian Bible college, he entered seminary pursuing his master's in divinity. During his college and seminary studies, he focused on his academic and personal passion for history, theatre and art. His religious studies intensified his interest in spirituality, and in his research of the paranormal expanded throughout the 80s and 90s. Scott is the founder and publisher of Intrepid magazine, a journal dedicated to politics, science, extraterrestrial contact, unexplained phenomena, and alternative fringe theories. So without further ado, let's bring on our guest for today. Hi Scotty, welcome back to Capricorn Radio.
Hi James, it's nice to be in Ireland, at least virtually.
Virtually in Ireland. Well, that you are, Scotty, that you are. You know, Scotty, I want to give you a little plug in because I love what you do. First of all, you do Intrepid Radio. You have your own radio show with Dr. John Ward. You also do the Intrepid magazine, which is accompaniment for the radio show, I presume.
Yes.
And you also do the Paradigm Symposium, which is really gaining massive momentum. And I know you've got that coming up later in the year. You've got big names, Robert Bauval, Andrew Collins, Von Daniken. You got Graham Hancock coming up, Micah Hanks, Nick Redfern, Larry Scranton, John Ward, John Anthony West, and yourself. It's just a minefield of alternative research, Scotty. It's really...
It's going to be amazing. We like to surround ourselves with these people. And, you know, everything we do from Intrepid magazine, we now just entered our fourth year.
Wow.
Existence. Intrepid Radio is kind of the radio voice of the magazine that John and I do. And we started that really to dig into the archaeology and history and the things that people don't normally talk about on radio and make it fun to listen to. And of course we've extended into all different kinds of alternative interviews with people, all the different personages that are out there in these fields. And so it's been a great amount of fun. We do Paradigm Symposium. This is our third year doing that. And we launched with all the guys from Ancient Aliens back in 2012.
Sure.
Von Daniken and Giorgio Tsoukalos and all of those people, Philip Coppens, the late Philip Coppens.
Yeah.
And last year we had Robert Bauval, Robert Schock, and all of those people. And this year we've got Von Daniken back, as you mentioned, and Graham Hancock and Andrew Collins and all of those. So it's going to be quite an event. It's in October, and if I may surreptitiously slip in a plug, it's October 2nd through the 5th in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and people come from all over the world to this event. So go look up ParadigmSymposium.com, and you'll see all about it.
Sure. Yeah, you know, the reason I mentioned these three, because this is really, it's all under the one umbrella, as you say, Scotty. It's basically, the conference is the voice for the people where everybody can meet. The radio show is the voice for the magazine, and the magazine's the written content that's exploring these worldwide mysteries. So, you know, it's just different ways of bringing the media to the public's attention.
Exactly. And, John Ward, who is my partner in all of these efforts, he has a certain academic stance that he has to maintain because he and his wife, Dr. Maria Nilsson, they have the quarry sites at Gebel El Silsila. It's the largest archaeological site in Egypt. It spans about 20 kilometers and square and spans both sides of the Nile. It's the old quarries from the dynastic period to the Greco-Roman period and all the way back. They found evidences of things that go back 17,000 years with rock art and structures and things like that.
Wow.
And it's an amazing site. But, of course, because they are scholars and academics running this site, they have to be very careful how they put out their, what would you call it, their belief or their
philosophy.
Philosophy that melds over into the more of the alternative thought and alternative theories. So John is very well versed in all of that. even prior to being an archaeologist there. And so he has to be a little careful, but we get him pulled out into and talking about the paranormal and the metaphysical and the hermetic and all of that. So we do entertain all of that, even though he has to maintain a certain stance publicly.
Of course, just for the listeners, your co-host and partner, Dr. John Ward, is an Egyptologist, and I'd love to get to speak to John. I was hoping I would see you guys, because you guys were in Egypt and we nearly tied in at the same time, but hopefully when you're on your Egypt tour this October coming 2014, we might get to meet up. But tell us a bit, because I want to talk about this, because I've just come back from Egypt myself. It's been a few years since I was there, Scotty, but tell us about your little Egypt trip, how that went, and and what you seen there.
Well, last year, a little over a year ago, John and I were writing our book together, which just released last October, The Exodus Reality. And we have two different theories of Moses, of who he was historically. And so I took a trip over to Egypt, my first time there with John, and we spent a month going to all these different sites associated with the Moses mythology, if you will. And so we wrote our book on that and found two different historical characters. And we've been on your show and we talked about that. And so we decided somewhere over the year, we said, we should take a group of people over here. And we founded the Exodus Reality Adventure. And we brought 10 people with us this last year not this last year, this last February. And we took a 2-week tour, spent most of the time on our Dahabea, our Nile River boat, and we did ports of call all up and down the Nile. And then and what's unique about our trip is we get, because of their connections as archaeologists, we had no less than 6 different archaeologists, Egyptians that are all work for the Department of Antiquities in Egypt, that are friends of John and Maria's, and they met us, and we got to see things you don't get to see on tours, and got information you don't normally get to get. And so we did that in February, and I stayed on an extra 2 weeks, and the site at Gebel El Silsila with them. Just amazing things I can't even talk about, because they have yet to publish some of this material.
Wow.
As archaeologists, and just amazing site. You'd think a quarry. People go, a quarry, they dug out rocks. It's amazing. Maria herself refers to Gebel El Silsila as the largest temple site in all of Egypt, because you've got all these different eras that have carved temples, and there are tombs, and there are different structures there, and shrines, and sphinxes. And things. There was one place where we walked through where there are 3 sphinxes that are about the size of not as big as the Sphinx of Giza, but think of a really large SUV vehicle, and got 3 of these sphinxes just laying toppled in a quarry, and things like that in association with Amenhotep III, and Amenhotep, son of Hapu, who happened to be John's candidate for Moses.
Sure. And
so it's very interesting stuff back in there. And we're taking another tour in October, a week after the Paradigm Symposium. So the 13th through the 27th of October of this year, we're taking 10 more people back. We still have seats available on that. So people can actually go to ExodusReality.com. Don't go to Exodus Realty. There is an Exodus Realty. Somebody will want to sell you some swampland in Florida.
Sure.
But ExodusReality.com.
You gotta be tricky with the web names these days. There's always somebody with a slightly alternative web name.
Yes. Well, we went to establish Exodus Reality on Twitter and found out there's a guy who has Exodus Reality as his Twitter name. And I didn't see anything related to history on his site.
Wow.
But what an amazing experience we had over there. We brought along Chris Conway, Scottish medium. Some of your listeners may be familiar with Chris. He was he came in after the British show Most Haunted had dismissed Derek Acora, and Chris came on as their medium, and he was there for a couple of seasons. And I will say this: he had a little bit of problems with the show and the way things were done, and he stopped doing the show. But that's kind of his claim to fame, how people know his name out there. And one of probably the most genuine mediums that I know. If you're anything like me, you run into people who they're a dime a dozen. I'm psychic. And it's, oh, that's great. Thank you. But Chris is one of those genuine articles. And he ran into things for us on that trip that were just astounding. And things, making connections between even John and I that we didn't know existed. And into ancient Egypt, he told me about, I don't know how much time you have to hear this, but...
Oh, all the time in the world, Scotty.
I had some interesting experiences there last year. And two in particular, we were at Saqqara, which is outside of Memphis, about 30 miles south of Cairo. And the stepped pyramid of Dozier is there, and there's the courtyards in the City of the Dead, just an amazing place. And there's the ruins of this open-air courtyard, I would say roughly the size of a football field. And on one side, they had all these little temples built, well, on both sides, and all kinds of structures in the middle. And I sat on a stone at the far end of this, and I was just imagining in my mind's eye what this thing might have looked like. And we were just all alone there, and John was walking around looking at some inscriptions, and I had this flash in my head. Now, I am not psychic, but I had this flash for a couple of seconds in my mind's eye where I could see the courtyard as it looked 500 years ago. And it was even down to the lighting and the smells and the sensory perceptions there. And it was late afternoon and kind of where that golden sun comes from behind the buildings and casts long shadows. And there was torches lit, and I could smell incense in my mind. And I saw priests, 4 or 5 of them, kind of in a row, walking, carrying platters or objects, and they were chanting. And that was the sum total of it. And it brought tears to my eyes, not because I was emotionally involved or invested, but I've heard other people say, when you get actual metaphysical type connections of some kind, that tear duct gets operated. You feel the chills, you get the tear will come. And so in that split couple of seconds there, I thought, man, that was pretty real in my mind's eye. And I talked to John about it, and then I talked to Chris about it a little bit. And he said, you may have seen something there. And he came this year, back in February now. We went to the same spot, and we sat on the same stone where I sat last year. And he told me, he said, now, this for your listeners, John and I are deeply into the academic side of things and the archaeological and the historical. Take this and put this over in the metaphysical category. There are things that we experience that we cannot comprehend, veils we can't seem to pierce that seem to fly in the face of the academic side of things. And so we don't talk about them a great deal, just for fear that people will look at our academic work and say we're hacks. But Chris was there, and he said, Scotty, he says, he's Scottish, he says, you have an Egyptian man here that is with you when you're in Egypt. He says he's ancient. He says the way Chris said it, at first he's looking in his mind's eye, and he goes, he says he's an ancient Egyptian. He says he's naked, except he's wearing a nappy. And I said, what? I said, that's just great. I said, you're picking up an ancient Egyptian man in a diaper for me. And he kind of chuckled, and I said, do you think maybe it's a loincloth? And he goes, oh, that's probably it. And we were laughing about it.
Wow.
He said he won't give me his name. He said he wants to make sure he can trust you. He said, but he connected with you last year because he says what he's telling me is that he believes like you believe. He thinks like you think, and he was drawn to you because of that. And we didn't get much more defined than that, but I thought that's interesting. And he said, you left him, he left you at John's house in Luxor when you left Egypt last year. And John did call me a couple of weeks after I left Egypt last year and said, Scotty, he says, you've left somebody here. We don't know who it is, he says, but he's here in the house. And so Chris told me, he says, this man will always be connected with you when you're in Egypt, but he'll never leave Egypt. So when you're here, he's with you. And we thought that was very interesting. Then about a week later in this trip, this last year now, about a week later, we were at the tomb of Senenmut. And I'd had a huge, very deeply emotional experience there on the spiritual realm. with connections to things that, it's too long a story to go into here. But I asked Chris, I said, do you feel anything here? And he said, yes. He says, your man is here. And he says, he's giving his name. And Chris couldn't pronounce it. And he said, it sounds like this, and this. And he's offering you something and so on. And there was this very interesting, thing that I really can't talk about. But, what was interesting about it was that it made connections to the ancient Hermetic Order of Thebes, which was revived in the Victorian era as the Hermetic Order of Luxor. And John was a member of this group for a while, and he left it. He said it just got a little too silly for me at times, and yet there was something that this guy was offering me, an object in his hands that Chris saw that was linked to John. When he told John, John's eyes went wide, and he said, "Are you kidding me?" He says, that name you've just given is a name that nobody except the order knows about. He says, and the object he's offering you, he says, is something that was lost 100 years ago from the Hermetic Order of Luxor, and people have been searching for this thing for years. And I'll just say it was a big red ruby about the size of a tea saucer. Chris said, this man is offering this to you as a gift. And I said, I wish you could give it to me. And John, so the connection between John and I was interesting there because it's something he's studied for years. I and Chris didn't know a thing about. And so, people listening to these stories, it's like when I hear people's stories of these kinds of things, your skeptical mind naturally goes, oh, BS. And, you just pan it off. It goes in what I call my bullshit can. Mm-hmm. Sure. And, if I can say that. And, yet when you're experiencing it, it's very different. And so in Egypt, not only is there that historical and archaeological draw for me and the fascination of the history, but there is that mystical side, if you will, that hermetic, that magical side that has now reared its head. And, what do you do with that kind of experience when there is somebody who's passing this information on to you and you don't know what to do with it other than to say, there are things you know about and connections and linkages you've made that you could not possibly have known. And now it's linked me to things that John has been studying for years. And so it's very interesting, the things that happen there. So going to Egypt, it's impressive. Getting your feet in the sand there and saying, this happened here. These things that we've read about and seen on documentaries and in books for all our lives. And you're standing there and you're touching it. You're going into places that people don't get to go into. We were at the Serapeum, which is at Saqqara, the tombs to the Apis bull. And, we were allowed they opened up the back door way down in these caverns and we got to step down off the wooden platforms that are built for people to walk through and back into the rough-hewn floors and into the dark where there's no electricity, no lighting, and got to see things there and look through there. And it was just an amazing experience historically, metaphysically, just unbelievable. So,
Scotty, your passion shines. Your passion shines through, brother. It's like you can tell when somebody's got the bug. Funny you say, Scotty, just on the psychic experience that you had. Just to touch on that before we go on further, because we're going to review a book today and not talk about Egypt. Yes. But yeah, you actually described some of the major qualities of a psychic experience, that clairalience, the psychic sense of smell, and the clairvoyance and the clairaudience or the clairsentience. All these, you had a mix of things there, Scotty. It's because usually people have it's not that they see something, they can actually smell the environment, they can feel the environment it's like they're transported back in time and they're there.
That's exactly what happened to me at Saqqara last year. And, I immediately jumped to I have this thing that I kind of coined, you're either a big S skeptic or a small S skeptic. The big S skeptic is the skeptic who is the denier. He's the one that, I look at like Michael Shermer, one of the big skeptic, organizations, the head of all that. And I watch him in interviews or listen to him and his basic answer for things is usually, no, it isn't. No, it doesn't. No, you're wrong. That's not true. And there's no real counterpoint made other than, no, you're wrong. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, that theory. And then you've got your small S skeptics, which is what I am, John is, probably you and everybody else, is that we we say we have to approach all this stuff with a skeptical mindset to, in a sense, weigh out what is true and what is not true.
Which is healthy, Scott, to be a small s.
It is. It is. You have to be. So when I hear about this stuff, my general reaction is to be skeptical. I say the proof of these things being real is as easy as proving the existence of God. And I actually said that in the book we're going to talk about today, The Secret History of the Reptilians. I said proving the existence of a reptilian race on this planet and all the stories behind it and the mythos built around about it is as easy as proving the existence of God and sitting with him on his patio drinking a cup of Darjeeling. It's very hard to prove these things. There's evidences for all of this, but evidences don't usually stack up to be able to prove anything. It's when I talk about paranormal investigation and ghost hunting and that kind of things. I've had myriads of experiences, so much experience in that area that I don't doubt the existence. However, can I say that this EVP or that thing that touched me or this or that, all these evidences compiled up, which really pile up to anecdotal experience.
Sure.
Does that mean it's a ghost? No. It means something is there. I don't know what it is. And so the same with the reptilians. It's you see these evidences, but you have no proof that those evidences mount up to anything other than things that look like it may be this. And so I say with the reptilians, there's something to it all. Can I come right out and subscribe to the notion that reptilians exist on this planet still and that they came from some other planet and all of this? No, I can't subscribe to that, but I can say there's something to it, but there's still no proof in the pudding yet. And that's where it has to be left.
Sure. And let me just tell the listeners about the book. The book is called The Secret History of the Reptilians, the pervasive presence of the serpent in human history, religion, and alien mythos. And I think you touch on the three key bodies there. It's, you're touching basically, the mythology, the religion, the actual history, Scotty. And then it's an investigation that you go into. And like you quite rightly said in the production chat, like that, the book evolved a different way for you. I guess you set out with an agenda to write a book, and it kind of, at least you're flexible and adaptable to do that, Scotty. And that's what I think you recognized a niche that needed to be filled, because there is this mass hysteria, Scotty, in a way around this subject matter. And I think you've kind of reduced it down from the crazy chaos to.
Absolutely, yes. That's you've got to look at this as a mythology that is built from something, as we all know so well. All mythology tends to have its roots in real facts somewhere way in the distant past. And so the reptilians, I wanted to look at this as matter of fact, in the book, I went to, as I was writing the book, and I mentioned it live in the book as I was doing it, I said, I just entered reptilian aliens on a Google search, and I came up with something like 1.6 million different references on the internet to reptilian aliens. I looked at the top 10, and out of those top 10, I think the vast majority of them, 8 or 9 of them, all had the very same text, the very same story, the very same articles, with no sources given on any of them. Trying to trace the original source of this. Somebody wrote that, and everybody's copied it over.
Copied and pasted it in, Scott. Copy and pasting it.
And then they add their own opinions on things. And they state empirically things like, and so we know now by all of this that the reptilians are a race that came from the star system of Draco, and they came to this earth, and they were at war with terrestrial reptilians, and the terrestrials won out, and these reptilians from outer space, they went into hiding. They're kind of in the background. They're really what's behind the scenes of things like the Illuminati and the Fourth Hand and things like this, and yet they give no evidence of that. They're stating a theory, but a theory usually has to have a solid hypothesis. The hypothesis on this is based on something that really bears no evidence. And so it all stems out of writings of like Zecharia Sitchin, which he's onto something there. However, Sitchin has made so many mistakes in his translations of ancient Sumerian and things like that you say there was either faulty scholarship or deliberately trying to squeeze a round peg into a square hole, or the other way around. And so I come up in this book saying we're a bit empty-handed. There isn't anything that really proves they exist, so it's a mythos. It's a notion, it's an idea, as it is opposed to a hypothesis and a really solid theory. You've got statuettes, statuary, all kinds of little bits and pieces of things. You've got the fact that reptilians appear in the form of serpents and dragons throughout every human culture in antiquity, and in every religious tale throughout history.
Sure.
The symbol of the resurrection of the snake, by the virtue of the fact that it sheds its skin and so on, is an ancient concept that's incorporated into religion and spirituality. All of this exists, but does that prove where the theory came from? Did they encounter reptilians, or did they encounter snakes in the desert? And they said, this is a symbol of resurrection. And they used it as symbolism. We don't know for sure. And while I repeat again, there's something to it all, there's no way to know for sure until we find that evidence that is without a doubt.
Well, on my own personal journey, Scotty, I've been to Peru, and I've indulged in a shamanic experience with ayahuasca, and I have met serpent beings. When I say serpent beings, I don't advocate the use of drugs, by the way. Go and explore your consciousness with ayahuasca, or don't. It doesn't bother me either way.
I can do that with a good shot of single malt Highland Scotch. So.
Exactly. You know, I mean, I like a little whiskey too, Scotty. Very fond of whiskey, you know. However, I did it once, and I don't have any intention to go back to do it. I wanted to understand it from, you know, because I thought it would make me understand this serpent mythology. I met serpent gods, Scotty. And when I say I met them, I mean there were serpents dancing around the room with me. And I have no doubt that, you know, this serpent mythology that's in ancient times has a lot to do with maybe psychedelic compounds as much as anything. Now, I'm not ruling out any other, I'm not ruling out any other possibility. However, shamanism and serpents go hand in hand. So, you know, and then maybe religious comes in and they try to stamp out shamanism, or, you know, so I'm open to that too, you know.
Yes.
I'm open to that too, but that's just...
So I don't want to come across like there's a difference between researching and belief, facts and belief. I can believe a lot of things, and there are a lot of things I believe that have no basis in solid factual foundation or proof or evidence. If you just take Christianity for an example. I was raised a Christian and attended Christian Bible college and seminary, as you said in the intro. And all of those things were things that I believed and could only sustain the belief in them. The proof of them was contained within the faith, not from without the faith. And I drifted a bit from that because I said, I cannot substantiate this anywhere else but from within. And it became hard for me. As Richard,
in saying that though, Scotty, that does qualify you a lot, because you have explored the theology, of this whole saga, from, you know, and it kind of qualifies you to talk about all this stuff, because there's a lot of biblical references too, Scotty. And of course, the serpent, the most famous case of the serpent in the Garden of Eden. Maybe explain that one, Scotty.
Well, it's interesting that the stories, if you grew up in Judaism, if you grew up in Christianity, you're going to be very familiar with the story of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, and the serpent and the tempting and the forbidden fruit and all of that. However, what I found was very interesting is that in the original texts, well, original quote-unquote text, going back as far as you can, you go into the Hebrew of the text, and the name Satan or devil or Lucifer never appears in that text in relation to the serpent in the garden. That was almost 1,000 years before the serpent was attributed to a Satan character. It was a character named Nakash in the Hebrew tongue, and Nakash was the serpent character in the Bible. And Nakash came in, and the language of the text, I think there's a lot of subtext to that story. And I think there are things that are written in that text that you are meant to think a little deeper than the surface story. Did Adam and Eve and the serpent and the eating of forbidden fruit, did that all happen? Maybe. Some people believe that's literal because by faith they accept the Bible as a literal account of human history. Yet when you examine it from the outside, it could be an allegorical tale of the creation of man or the beginning of man. It could be a myth altogether that's got something hidden deep down inside. What you've really got with the serpent in the garden, I believe, on the basis of my research, that story is a tale of impregnation. That the serpent, it says he beguiled her, which is another word for seduced her. It said she was seduced, and she took of the forbidden fruit and gave also to her husband, and seduced him in turn to do the same. And then it says she bore children. She bore twin sons, Cain and Abel. And what the passages in the Old Testament seem to bear out, and I'm not sucking this out of my thumb, the text itself seems to be very strongly indicating that the children she bore were of two different bloodlines. One son, Cain, was the son of Nakash and Eve, and the twin brother was the son of Adam and Eve. And when God passes the curse on them all after the fall of man, he tells the serpent, he utters the first messianic prophecy. You talk to any rabbinic scholar, Christian scholar, they will tell you this text in Genesis 3 is talking about the coming Messiah. It's where God says to the serpent, and there will be a day when you will bite his heel, but he will return and crush your head. It's supposed to be speaking of a Messiah, one that would save the bloodlines and save the human race on a savior status. And that Messiah became known in Hebrew terms as the kinsman redeemer, the one who was one of us, redeemer. And then he says to all three of them, Adam, Eve, and Nakash, he says, and there will be constant enmity or conflict between the seed of the serpent and the seed of the humans. And all through the Old Testament, you find the genealogies establishing the line that the Messiah would eventually come from. This is why they established the genealogy from Adam to Noah, from Noah to Abraham, from Abraham to King David in the New Testament all the way to the Virgin Mary. They trace their bloodlines all the way back to the Adamic line. And in every instance, they use the firstborn son as the progenitor of the next generation to prove that this bloodline was strong until you get all the way back to the get-go, the very beginning. They don't take the line through the firstborn son, who was Cain. They take it through the thirdborn son, Seth. Why do they do that? What's obviated in the text is because Cain was really the first of the Nephilim, if you will. He was the product of the commingling of the Elohim, or this serpent character, with a human woman. And he could not produce the kinsman redeemer because he was not thoroughly pure human. He was part of the blood of the Elohim and humans. And whereas Abel was murdered without offspring, apparently, and Seth, the thirdborn, was born of Adam and Eve, and therefore carries the human bloodline. So they trace the line through Seth, not through the firstborn in that case. Why? Because Cain was not the firstborn pure human-blooded person. And when you get to the Noah account, which links into all this reptilian stuff, Nephilim stuff, all of that, talks about Noah. We always were taught that Noah was chosen to build the ark because he was the only righteous man left who honored God. Yet that word righteous in the Hebrew has a different connotation. In Hebrew it reads, he was the only pure-blooded man left, pure in all his generations through Seth to Adam. And it was establishing that the messianic line was derived through the pure blood. And when I keep saying that the Messiah had to be one of us, a kinsman redeemer, the one of us savior of mankind, it's obviating that there's the opposite. If you had to be pure-blooded, why do you have to keep repeating he has to be one of the pure-blooded humans if there was nothing else other than pure-blooded humans?
Exactly. It's
obviating the opposite existed. And so this is where, at least in biblical mythology, if you will, whether you believe that or not, I don't want to be insensitive to people's religious sensibilities or faith issue, but if you pull back out of the box and look at it as one of the many cultural religious mythologies that exist out there, the whole story of the Reptilians through Nakash, the Nephilim, really piggybacks on the story of the Messiah. The Messiah is the vehicle by which we are carried all through biblical history to prove that there was a pure human bloodline. So it's interesting stuff when you start, and it's so big and vast. When I started writing this book on the Reptilians, I saw a very different picture of God emerging as I had been taught. And so that really altered my beliefs a little bit. So.
Of course, you also mentioned about Gilgamesh losing his powers to the immortality of a serpent. And
yes, he did. And he's not the only one. I only hit on it very superficially, but I went through a list of some of the different major mythologies, religious mythologies in history. Gilgamesh was one. You had, in the Anunnaki, you had, Elil, the chief god, Enlil. Elil, he's also known as, had Enki, also known as Ea, create, if you read in the translations of the cuneiform text, it says he said, create primeval men for us, to do our work for us, to till our ground, to mine our resources, to dig our canals. And so Enki, Ea, did this. And then when the human king Atrahasis, who was the king of Eridu, the city of Eridu, which is all historical, he pleads in these cuneiform texts to his god Enki, Ea, to come and deliver us from this bondage, this great bondage of slavery that we are under the gods, the Anunnaki. And it says, and Enki bent his ear to his servant. It sounds very biblical. And came down with his mighty men of valor they actually rose up out of the underground sea, the great Abzu, into the Serpent's Marsh, it was known as. Enki's most cherished place. He would ride his boat through the Serpent's Marsh and the waters around Eridu. And the Serpent's Marsh became known as Enki, who is also known as Ea, became known as Ea's Den. And Ea's Den became Ea Den, and Ea Den became Eden in the Genesis story. And the names of the gods, and Elil became El of the Hebrews, and Elohim, El Shaddai, El Elyon. Enki, Ea became the base word for Yahweh, which is Jehovah. And so you see that. You go to Hindu religion, you look at Krishna. Krishna dispensed the forbidden knowledge of the gods to the humans while sitting beneath the banyan tree in the beautiful garden on top of a coiled serpent. You have Quetzalcoatl of the Mayans, the feathered serpent god, who delivered the forbidden knowledge of the gods to the humans and was executed for it by the gods. You have Nakash in the Garden of Eden story, which took on a very different twist, but delivering the forbidden knowledge of the gods.
You know, Scotty, you say forbidden knowledge, and I used to always think that forbidden knowledge was basically a certain set of knowledge, like a certain set of rules or a certain set of key facts that was forbidden from the rest of the knowledge. But I think maybe forbidden knowledge maybe just being all knowledge, Scotty. It might have been like...
I think it's all knowledge. If you look at the... it's very interesting. If you look at the book of Enoch, which was removed from the canon of Scripture, and it sits out in the apocryphal books, Enoch really expands on this. And he talks about 200 prefects of the Elohim that set foot on Mount Armon, which is Mount Hermon in northern Israel, straddling today the Golan Heights. And they went in unto human women and impregnated them and cohabited with them. It actually says in the texts that they loved them. And so this was, and they shared the forbidden knowledge of the gods with them. And it even lists what these knowledges were. The signs of the sun, moon, and stars, the making of weapons, the making of mirrors, cosmology, and also cosmetics. So makeups and things like that. Agriculture. These are the things they taught. They gave knowledge to the people.
Irrigation, everything, yeah.
And there's even the ancient legend of Berosus, the 4th century Greek philosopher. He spoke of Oanes, the half fish or amphibian, or if you will, serpent, a half man, half amphibian god, and his people that would come up out of the out of the waters of the Mediterranean and would teach the people all of these same forbidden knowledges.
I'm not sure. Sorry, Scotty. I'm not sure if it's the I'm not sure if it's the Oanes, but is there not an amphibian type creature that gave metallurgy to somebody as well? That might have been. That might have been.
Yeah, that's the Oanes character, and there's probably others that are not at the tip of my mind. But what I also find very interesting about all of this is that in the biblical account, you've got Nakash giving forbidden knowledge, and then it's right there in Genesis. You can pick up your Bible, I think it's Genesis 3:22 and 23, something like that. Mm-hmm. In the midst of all this, before the fall took place, and in the midst of this story of Nakash seducing Eve, it says, and Elohim, the name used for God almost 3,000 times in the Old Testament. And by the way, Elohim is a word that can be used singularly or plurally in a sentence, depending on the context of the sentence and the antecedents within the sentence. Elohim, the him on the end is the Hebrew suffix used to denote plurality. And so when God in the Old Testament appears as Elohim almost 3,000 times, amongst other names for him, they say, well, this is merely the singular God with a multiplicity of powers and majesty. Mm-hmm. And that's where they get the plurality. On the other hand, I'm on a radio interview here. Sorry about that, James.
You're fine.
This plurality also was used when God himself in Psalm 82 was talking to a group known as the Divine Council. And they were called, God says right in the passage in Psalm 82, if you read it, and Elohim, singular, stood in the midst of the Elohim. And he said to them, you are all Elohim, the bright shining princes of heaven. Wow. Which relates back to the name Nakash. Nakash means bringer of knowledge, bright shining one. He was one of the Elohim. But there's this verse in Genesis 3 that says, and Elohim said, the humans have eaten of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and have become like gods, just like us.
Wow.
It's just like us. Let us, therefore, go down and prevent them from also eating of the tree of life, lest they become just like us.
Wow.
Just like gods. It's mixing up the phrases there. But he's talking to a plurality. Elohim said to the Elohim, let us go down and stop this from going any further. And two big questions arose from me out of that verse. It's number one, what did God have against the humans having knowledge?
Exactly.
Because he said they've eaten of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And let us prevent them from also then eating of the tree of life. And then again, who was this Elohim that he was concerned that his humans would be just like them? And so there's some big questions that came up, and this ties into all these different mythologies as well.
Wow. Absolutely fascinating, Scotty. Absolutely fascinating. It's mind-blowing. The whole thing's mind-blowing. I wanted to mention the Ubaid figurines, because these artifacts, from the British Museum. I don't know if you've ever been to the British Museum, but every time I'm there, I check them out because, I just think they're incredibly fascinating because we have artifacts showing people with humanoid stroke human bodies, with lizard heads. And a lot of people refer back to these as tangible evidence in a way.
Tangible evidence of reptilians. But of course you've also got that in Egypt. You've got all these different, you've got the Chinese dragon, in China. It goes back to ancient times. And all these gods seem to have different connotations. The Chinese dragon was a god of happiness and fertility and joy. Whereas in Egypt you had the serpent god who would eat the sun at the end of the day, and things like that. It was a symbol, as we mentioned earlier, of resurrection and all these. But the serpent seems to be tangibly connected with all these gods. And you've got the little figurines. Were these characters that they encountered in physical form? Or was it, as I like to say, you see these old rock paintings where you've seen, the people all standing around in Neolithic form, and then the one big giant, looks like he's got a globe on his head with light emanating from it.
Sure.
So the question is, did they encounter these beings, or Was that just like, I'm an illustrator and a story writer. I can draw pictures of anything to tell a story. And was it as simple as somebody writing a story? Mm-hmm. Or were they recording something that actually happened to them?
It could be artistic expression, and it could be artistic expression of something, of an experience like I had. I mean, an ayahuasca vision, where they actually tried to record what they seen and went, because the ayahuasca visions, for example, are incredibly real to the person. However, when you try to explain it to somebody what happened, they just look at you as if you have 10 heads. And they just don't get it, and it's like, but if I was
There's something about that, the use of that kind of, in that case, it's an ancient, what's the word I'm looking for?
Practice?
No, what it produces, the images and psychotropic.
Psychotropic or entoptic, yeah.
But if you use that, is that actually bringing you into a different place so you can actually see and experience what's there? That's the big question. Or is it all built out of your imagination?
Well, that's a good philosophical point to expand on, Scotty, because I'm not denying that maybe I went into their realm, which may be real somewhere on the plane. It may be a very real realm. It's just I entered into that realm for a short period of time and came back out again to tell the story. So I'm not saying that realm is not real.
Right.
And I'm open to it being generated in my brain. However, the problem is that not everybody, but a high percentage of people who take ayahuasca or DMT type compounds all experience very, very similar, if not exactly the same experiences, which leads you to believe it's a very real event that's happening.
And I wonder how much our psyche builds into that. If I were to go try that now, I have so much information about it. I wonder if my brain would pick out the things that I think I'm going to see when I do that, or if is it going to give me something much more real? I have a little innate fear of taking something that's going to make me lose control of my facilities, and my mental faculties.
Sure.
I would like to try that someday to see what happens, to see what's there. For me, and this is just a sideline, really a rabbit trail, but for me, there is that knowing so much of what's been said about that other dimension, that other side of things, yet I can only get this close. And I don't know sometimes, is it my imagination working on overtime? Is it my imagination tapping into the things I've read and heard about so many times? Mm-hmm. Or is it real experience? And, that's the tough part for me because it's in my mind. But there's a part of me that says that there's going to be a day very soon where I need to experience that and see if there is something there. Is experience all within the mind, or is there something tangible that a veil that we simply can't pierce right now? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And there are ways to get glimpses.
Yeah.
And so I don't know anything. It really comes down to I know nothing.
It gets very convoluted very quick, Scotty, doesn't it? It gets very convoluted very quick.
And these are the things, remember in ancient times, madmen, as they called them, were considered holy men. And if you wanted to get knowledge about what's going on in the future or around you, you went to see a holy man who was a madman. And because they were revered in certain cultures. And I have said, when I was in between writing the book on the Nephilim and the Reptilian book, I was so distraught in my mind over really feeling like I had lost the original faith I had because I had seen so many different things that changed that for me. And delving these things so deeply, I said to somebody once, I said, I said that these are the things that will drive you to insanity if you don't put the control over it. Because you can go so deep down the rabbit hole
trying
to find the answers.
Very true.
You could lapse into totally losing touch with where you are.
We could lose the plot, Scotty. You could lose the plot very easy.
Right, lose the plot.
But Scotty, I mean, let's talk about the book. You split the book into two parts. The Empire of the Serpent and the Serpent in Alien Subculture. Now, I want to touch on the alien subculture because this alien mythos that we're living with today, people are just so convinced that, aliens are reptiles and that we're being visited by a reptilian race and, this kind of all does head back to, well, two individuals that I can see, David Icke being one and Michael Tsarion is another. And not to pick fault on these guys, Jesse Ventura did a good job of that on conspiracy theory, his episodes, and,
yes.
I mean,
that was quite an encounter.
Yeah, but I mean, that was quite an encounter. That's a politically correct way of saying it, Scotty, but, it was quite an encounter. I mean, Jesse took on David Icke and he did the same thing. He researched where this story's coming from, and really it does all head back to Icke, and, that's something I don't want to even touch really, because it's besides the point. Jesse did it well.
I will tell you, I probably lopped off any opportunity to interview David Icke by the things I said about him in this book, so.
Exactly. Well, I'm trying to be politically correct here, but, I got issues with Icke because there is a lot of money, conflicts in what he does. I mean, if I'm going to say about the People's, Voice Radio, 100 grand a month is what he needs for a video. Yeah. I'm doing Capricorn TV on about $20 a month and it's better quality, Scotty. It's better, yes. It's better quality.
And I will say this about the money-making factor behind this. When you start doing anything, you have a passion for it. And I believe David Icke really believed what he was saying. Mm-hmm. And he had a passion for what he was doing 30 years ago. Mm-hmm. I believe it can turn into something else. And once something starts producing money for somebody,
true.
People will start taking that class envy stance against it and saying, well, you're just doing this to make money. And there's probably a portion of that that's true. For me in my own efforts, Intrepid magazine, I say I publish what I like and what I'm passionate about. Same with the Paradigm Symposium. However, and the books I write, they're about the things that I enjoy and I want to know more about. There's a passion there. At the same time, I say, if I can't make a living doing it, it becomes alongside of my working at the factory, so I can keep meat and potatoes on the table and a roof over my family's head. And so when you start, we were once accused at the Paradigm Symposium of being, another event for the rich. And I got on that guy, took him to task, and I said, no. I said, these things cost money to produce. Yep. And if we spend a year putting this together, why can't we take a little bit of pocket money out to make sure we're paying our electric bill? And, yes, there's some money to be made on these things, obviously. If you write a book for a publisher, and that book, as much passion as you put into that, if that book does not sell, you're going to be hard-pressed to get another contract for another book. And so things have to proliferate themselves in order. So the making of money, I have very little problem with somebody making good money off of what they're doing.
That's fine, Scotty. That's fine, Scotty. I agree. I agree.
Unless it comes down to, you say, his message has changed in order to proliferate the filling of a stadium. So he can make $100,000 a month. It's like we did the same thing in evangelical Christianity. The televangelists that were wearing, $2,000 pair of alligator shoes with their $3,000 Armani suit, and they drove a Rolls Royce, and they had a big mansion somewhere delivering the message of Christ. That flies in the face of what people think should be a very menial lifestyle, a very minimalist lifestyle, that the money that you make should go into the ministry, should go into people, rather than building you a $2 million mansion somewhere. And I understand, and we had our problems with people that did that. There were some pastors we knew that were so well paid, they were making more money than anybody in their church. But the church also voted those salaries in for those people. So the church wanted to reward the people who were teaching them. I get there's the two sides of that, but there's a certain aspect of all the big money-making thing that tends to taint somebody who is maybe delivering a valid message. With David Icke, I don't know how much of his message is false or now manufactured to proliferate the making of money. I think he believed he was onto something. And that's where he got his start. However, he has too many things where he's taken it a little too far for my liking. And to say that the reptilians came down and they now inhabit the bodies of all the monarchs of Europe and the royal families and things like that, that takes it a bit far for me. However, historically, you can see how the proliferation of the tribes that intermingled with the remnants of the Anunnaki, historically speaking, they spread throughout Eastern Europe and then through Europe. And the House of the Royal House of Wales is one that said it sprouts directly from that lineage. The Merovingians in the 400 to 700s AD claimed that they were of the royal line of Christ and the royal line of the serpent.
That's true, yeah.
They used that, and that ended up in the Thule Society, which Hitler changed into the National Socialist Party. All the way through the Theosophist to the Thule to Hitler used that. So what's true and what isn't true? There is a historical reference to that, but I think David Icke, to me, has taken it a little far. And he actually said that his first encounter with all of this came from watching the old 1970s miniseries V. Wow. And that's where he got his original ideas and started looking into it. So is he onto something? Maybe. Has he taken it a little far? Probably. But I think, and I say right here, I look at the beginning of that section that you talked about, and I say here, as you've seen, the key to understanding the connectivity of the serpent to reptilian alien mythos is completely predicated on having an understanding of how the serpent's role became so important in human history, and more specifically to people themselves. Believe what you will about spirituality, religion, science, or anthropology, the serpent figure has played prominently in the lore of ancient theory and has become the rock star of the current alien conspiratorial thought, the theory itself becoming the mothership, quote-unquote, for all the varied, extraneously divergent sub-theories making the rounds in the circles of the ufological faithful. Make no mistake, the secret history of the reptilians is as much a manufactured religion as are the snake and dragon cults from the depths of our anthropological past. That does not mean they do not exist in some form. But if that was the final conclusion, this book would end right here, I say. So all of this stuff, it's like religion building. Yeah. It starts with experience. It's like I talk about Moses at the burning bush. That was his spiritual epiphany. But he was the only guy there, the only guy that saw it, and he built a religion on it and proliferated that religion to today. Judaism still exists. Moses created Judaism out of whole cloth. Muhammad was of a rich family in a very splintered Arabic culture. They all in Mecca worship 290 different gods. And he was told by his mentor, one was a Christian man, one was a Jewish man. His mentor said, if you want to unify all these different clans and these splintered groups, you've got to, in a sense, go monotheistic. So what does he do in Mecca? He does away with 289 of the gods and takes the chief god, I think he was Hamad or Hamal, and raises him up and renames him Allah. And he says, Allah will now be our one singular monotheistic God, on which he based Islam. So he, too, like Moses, built a religion out of whole cloth to do one thing, to unify his people. To create he was nation building and unification. Moses did the same thing with what we are taught was a bunch of slaves from a family, and he needed to unify those people, so he created the law and he created Judaism. I think the same thing happens with the reptilians. Somebody had an experience along the way, and that has proliferated into this great mythos. And make no doubt about it, the belief in the reptilians is as much a religion as is Christianity or Judaism or Islam, just on a different level.
Wow. Yeah, it's an accurate way to describe this. It's religious in its doctrine in a way. And the Merovingian connection, Scotty, is the most, like you say in the book, it's mind-blowing because there's some sort of a tangible connection there. These guys truly believe they were connected to some,
Yes. Well, Merovic, the founder of the Merovingian dynasty, claimed that when his father impregnated his mother with him, his father was of the lineage of Jesus Christ. It was really one of the, not the first, but the more pronounced, 500, 600, 700 years after the time of Christ, saying that Christ had offspring. This whole Da Vinci Code thing. and claiming that his bloodlines came from the line of Christ. But his mother, when she was pregnant with him, went swimming in the ocean surf and encountered the great serpent from the sea, who raped her and magically dually impregnated the child. And so Merovic himself claimed to, obviously a fairly ignorant masses, that I am the product of both the line of Christ and the line of Satan, the line of Lucifer. And he claimed that, and these are where the claims start beginning, perhaps Jesus and Lucifer were brother gods. Perhaps they were one and the same, because you see a lot of biblical references to the characters and monikers that apply to both of them. I happen to believe that on a spiritual level, that Jesus and Lucifer, if they exist the way the Bible says, were probably both members of this divine council, this Elohim. They were both of the Elohim. Now, that flies in the face of historical studies on Jesus, and so on, but and certainly in the face of the Gospels. But you've got to remember there were over 60 Gospels written, and only 4 of them made it into the New Testament. So there you go.
Wow. Of course, and we're doing the show in Ireland today, Scotty, and you've mentioned a little bit of Irish mythology as well, the Tuatha De Danann.
Yes.
We got to talk about these guys, Scotty.
Yes. The Tuatha De Danann, again, this is another one of those mythologies that you can look at as purely spiritual, metaphysical, or you can look at it as saying there is real history behind this. Now, the Irish Book of Chronicles, why is the name escaping me? Not Book of the Dead. There's a different name for it. The Irish book, it talks about the Red Branch. It talks about these characters who came and sailed to the shores of Ireland and burned their boats when they got there, and they were these invading kings who came into Ireland in antiquity. And that the black cloud of smoke darkened the skies for 4 days of the burning of their ships. Now that's the historical side, the more physical, tangible side. And of course the other legend is that the Tuatha De Danann were these bright, shining kings from the heavens who came down, and they darkened the skies when they came, and they intermingled with human women. They gave they brought knowledge of the gods with them. And then the great wars broke out, and they were subdued and pushed back into the hollow hills, and they became known as the Elven folk. Which, when you look at this, even the word elf itself is a derivative that comes from El, or Elohim. And so and again, the bright shining kings from heaven ties into the Elohim being the bright shining princes of heaven.
There may have been an Israeli connection here too, with the tribe of Danu.
The tribe of Dan broke off, it is said, from Moses after the Exodus. They said, no, we're going to go this way. And they went north into above the Golan Heights today. What's the Golan Heights? Into the Syrian region and the Sumerian region, and they intermingled with the remnants of the Anunnaki tribe. And this is where the Tuatha De Danu have also been referred to as the Tuatha De Anu, of the tribe of the Anunnaki mixed with the tribe of Dan and the goddess Danu. And this is the tribe that is said to have proliferated across all of Northern Europe. There is also the historical study of the tribe of Dan that has linked them to the Danoi of the Aegean culture. And they came back to northern Israel and settled in the north, and they were considered to be part of the Phoenician settlement there. And you can still go there today. It was very controversial, but Shimka Yakubovici, who did the study on the Danoi and their presence in northern Israel, and finding tomb markers and so on that spoke of the Exodus, and the same in the Aegean, and even maps drawn out on old inscriptions and things like that, that links them to the Exodus. And so it's very interesting. All these mentions start to have that connection. The Tuatha De Danoi, the Tuatha De Danu, the Tuatha De Anu, the Anunnaki, the tribe of Dan, they all intermingled at one point and moved west.
Common source, commonalities, Scotty. It's all linked up with wording, theologies, mythologies, histories, fragments. It's crazy. It's a researcher's dream in a way, because there's something to it. There's something to all what we're talking about today, Scotty.
And a lot of this really depends on circumstantial evidence. When we wrote about Moses, and I believe Senan was my character for Moses, Grand Vizier beneath Hatshepsut, the hereditary crown prince of Egypt. There are so many circumstantial facts that match the biblical chronology that I have concluded that I believe this is the man. Now I have to keep, a 2% shadow of doubt there, because we don't know for sure, but he looks like he's the guy. Mm-hmm. But I always say, John Ward says this with me, every time you put trowel in the sand, you have the potential of unearthing a new discovery. Something that's going to add another apple to the cart or totally overturn the apple cart you think you already have established. So there's still so many discoveries to be made on this stuff. Mm-hmm. Finding the root source, the question always comes up, are we ever going to get there? I don't know. I don't know if that will ever happen. Is it all on a spiritual realm? But if you're an academic, you have to almost eschew the spiritual realm and look at it as anthropology and spread of religion and so on. So what's the truth there? We don't know for sure.
Sure. Wow, what a fascinating discussion, Scotty. What a fascinating discussion. It kind of ties in again, like you say, there's a spillover between the Nephilim and the Anunnaki and then the serpent mythology, and it's all really linked in a way. And I can see why you've done these 3 books, Scotty. I can see where one has kind of blended into the other. At least you've dedicated each one to its own research pile.
Yes.
And like you say, you could probably have filled another book on stuff like on the reptilians, but I think you took the core body of the idea, Scotty, and you went with it in terms of trying to solve at least part of the puzzle.
And that's the whole thing. It's trying to solve the puzzle. It's trying to look into this and say, is there something efficacious here? Is there something that I can really put my hand on? In the conclusion of this book, I talk about Richard Feynman. He was astrophysicist, a contemporary of Oppenheimer and Einstein.
I was talking about him yesterday, Scotty. I was having a philosophical discussion about Feynman. He's one of my heroes, and chaos theory. And
love Richard Feynman. And he said, I can't believe the special stories that have been made up about our special relationship to the universe. He's talking about God here, of course. And he says, because they seem too simple, too connected, too local, too provincial. The earth, he came to the earth, says Feynman. One of the aspects of God came to the earth, mind you, and look what's out there. It isn't in proportion. Anyway, it's no use arguing it. We should look to see what's true and what may not be true. Once you start doubting, which for me is a fundamental part of my soul, to doubt and ask, and to doubt and ask, it gets a little harder to believe. That's what Richard Feynman said. And I talk about, did a race of reptilians come to this planet long ago? Did they seed us? Are we simply a race that evolves and grows, learning from the past, moving beyond old superstitions and mythologies? Are we bound by religious thought and man-made myth, only to suffer at its invisible grasp until we move beyond the need for false messiahs and imagine gods, spirits, devils, monsters that subjugate us to our own fears? Or is it truly that we're the creation of a one true God, and all the rest is simply the concocted, fabricated veils of lies, deceit, obfuscation, and illusion that enslave us to the dictates of a demonic evil that would stand in the way of our knowing that God in a more real, meaningful way? These are the questions that I ask, James. And it's obvious to me, in the faith I've come out of, that God doesn't seem to go out of his way to present his case in any fashion that's not as old and cracked and crumbling as the last surviving manuscripts that tell his story. And accordingly, though, his opponents seem to work much harder gaining proselytes than he spends attempting to bring us to him. And so answering the call of religion, even when it's told it's supposed to be a personal loving God in charge, it's a much more daunting challenge than simply believing things are what they are. And so for me, I say at the end of this book, so toss the coin in the air, or all you D&Ders out there, you gamers, roll your 32-sided die. And are we simply the creatures at the behest of some great power, or are there a race that lives and thrives and grows off of and in spite of its misty history and scaly mythology? Has humanity experienced the visitations of non-human entities? There's the big question. And I just simply conclude by saying, trust no one, listen to no one, adhere to no one, grasp the gift of exploration and seek out the answers for yourself.
Sure.
For if you're comfortable simply living by the dictates of what someone else tells you is so, then you're doomed to live that life of constrained servitude. And think for yourself, and before you know it, the answers are going to make themselves as evident as the nose on your face, and the realization that all that really remains in the end is a kind of forbidden knowledge, a rage with and beyond reason against reason itself. As exiles from the comforts of bondage, we are the composers of a cognitive music that's not a spirituality or a religion, nor is it an eschewing of either, but it's a religion of, frankly, no religion, a faith of no faith and a belief in no belief. And yet, there exists that still small voice that's out there. And Aldous Huxley said, extinguished theologians lie about the cradle of every science as the strangled snakes beside that of Hercules. And, you know, that's what it all is. It's asking the questions, and it's what do I believe by faith versus what can I get my hands on tangibly?
Sure. I think you really kind of nailed. I don't have to ask the last question. You've kind of answered it for me there. I was just going to say where we at today, and I think a lot of people are embracing this archetype. And you know, when you take that archetype away that people are trying to adhere to, you know, you're left with kind of some of the truth and the reality. Yes, there is commonalities. Yes, there's strange mythologies mixing in with our histories. Yes, it's worthy of research and exploration, but no, leave that archetype at the door and follow the exploration yourself. Yeah, and I think that's what you've done in the book, Scotty. That's what you've nailed in the book.
I do talk in the book. I bring up Freud and Adler as the two, really the fathers of modern psychotherapy and psychoanalysis. And they approach the same thing from different points of view. Freud said, dig into your past. Adler said, dig into your future. And really what it's all based around is, and I talk about it in this book, it's the need of humans to have something to believe in, that is beyond the scope of what's explained to us in the black and white. We need to have that, and we're seeking that, and it gives us purpose, and it gives us faith, it gives us hope. And so the big question, does God really exist? There's a question. Do the reptilians really exist? Maybe. I don't know for sure, but we've based our mythologies on something. But we need these things in order to have something to believe in. It reminds me of an old song. I saw a video back on MTV, back when it used to be just a music video station. That dates me how old I am. But there's a music video, and I don't know who it was. I want to say it was Axl Rose, but I'm not positive. But he's just sitting in a studio with a guitar, and there's all these pictures of current affairs and wars and things and atrocities going on behind him. And the song, I don't even know what the song was, but the phrase caught me when I was just barely listening to it. It was in the background. And the song repeated the phrase, I need something to believe in. Because the things I've been taught, I can't believe in those things anymore. And I'm shiftless, I'm out here. And even Richard Feynman says, I'm perfectly comfortable feeling lost in an infinite universe. Because the question of belief, we need something, and so if we don't have it, we'll manufacture it.
Wow, awesome, Scotty, awesome. Okay, Scotty, we'll wrap it up at that. Just let's give out the websites again. It's paradigmsymposium.com. A massive conference for you this year. I wish you every success in October. Paradigmsymposium.com. You can get your tickets there. You can look at all the guest list there. What an awesome lineup. I see Maria D. Jones there on the list as well. I've had Marie D. Jones. I had Marie on the show recently talking about viral mythology. What an interesting guest as well. Great researcher. Really wish you all the success with that, Scotty. It looks fantastic. And it's really successful. I mean, it's successful because it's all done right. It's all the key speakers, it's all professional. It's like, I watched some of the footage. It is awesome, Scotty. Yeah. It's a good setup, really good setup. And, it's some conferences you can tell, their lifetime's going to be long, and some of them start up and they disappear, but this is a key conference for anybody's into this research.
It's interesting. I've had a bunch of people have asked me over the months, are you going to broadcast this? Can we pick it up on a stream somewhere?
Yeah.
And my answer is always absolutely not. Yeah. This is like sitting at the feet of Aristotle and the great philosophers. The experience of Paradigm Symposium is being there and interacting with these people and interacting with all the other guests there. That's one of the highlights of Paradigm, is that people left there saying, this wasn't just sitting and listening to a speaker. This was an experience that was enlightening because everybody was asking questions. And our speakers, I asked them to always be available. It's not, you can't just meet him for 20 minutes at his table when he's signing autographs. These people, great story. I know we're at the end here, but the first year when Eric von Daniken was here, what an icon in these fields. And he would get a little cocktail at the bar, and he'd grab his cigarettes, and he would go outside in the smoking area, a bench outside the hotel door, and he would sit there. And I saw a couple kind of very sheepishly approach him because he was sitting all alone. And they said, hi, we just wanted to say hello and meet you. And he goes, and he pats the bench next to him. He says, come and sit with me. He says, sit and talk for a while. And that's what he made himself completely open every day. Whenever he was free, he went out there and he talked to everybody and just let people come and sit with him and talk. And that's the unique thing about Paradigm, is that these people are available to pose your questions to them on a personal level.
Wow.
And it was very interesting, very, very enlightening. I say as the tagline, come to think, leave enlightened.
Yeah.
And I think that's what it's going to be.
Wow, beautiful. Of course, your personal website, Scotty, if people want to see copies of your books and everything else, it's scottalanroberts.com. And the magazine is intrepidmag.com, and you can follow the links there for the radio as well. And awesome show you do as well, Scotty. You got some big names on there as well. I love what you do. I've only listened to one live episode, but it's great though. It's great. It's fascinating to see you do everything. And we don't have enough people like you out there, Scotty. We don't have enough people. We have some people that are authors. We have some people that are, radio hosts. We got some people that do a conference now and again. But you do it all under the one umbrella.
I have said rather flippantly, I said, the day this isn't fun anymore is the day I do something else.
Wow.
And it's fun for me. I enjoy this. It enriches me, and I learn things. And I'm passionate about these things. And I hope that comes across to people, that we're trying to do something that's worthwhile.
Wow. Well, we'll leave it at that, Scotty. Again, I thank you for your time today. It's a pleasure chatting to you. And like I say, you come back anytime, Scotty.
James, thank you. It's a pleasure being with you. I appreciate it.
Oh, thank you, brother.